carry. Let's give him a hand.
It was a typical Thursday for caseworker Teresa Hunt. She warmly greets the new patient in the waiting room and leads him to Dr. Lee Silverman's office, the lead psychiatrist at Mercy Fitzgerald Hospital. Upon closing the door, the new patient, Richard Plotz, brandishes a .32 caliber revolver. Plotz immediately fires off several rounds into Mrs. Hunt, killing her instantly. Now turning to Dr. Silverman, he only has enough time to fire off just one shot, just grazing Silverman's forehead, before the doctor brandishes his own concealed weapon and shoots Plotz 3 times in the torso. Upon investigation, officers discovered an extra 39 rounds in the shooter's pockets. Yeadon Police Chief Donald Molyneux said this in investigating the shooting. Without a doubt, I believe the doctor saved lives. Without that firearm, this guy, Plotz, could have just went out in the hallway and just walked down the offices until he ran out of ammunition. In other words, Dr. Silverman prevented a potential mass shooting. While many are praising Dr. Silverman for his heroic actions, Silverman could face 5 years jail time and $10,000 in fines for carrying a concealed weapon in a gun-free zone, despite having a valid concealed carry permit. A concealed carry permit, simply put, is a state license that allows law-abiding citizens to carry a concealed weapon with them into any public place, excluding designated gun-free zones. Because these licenses are issued through the state, each state has its own laws on how restrictive they are in issuing them. But in general, each state can fall into one of 3 categories: shall issue states, may issue states, and constitutional carry states. Shall issue states are states that will issue a license as long as you meet the basic requirements set by that state. Some examples of these states include the great state of Texas, as well as Pennsylvania, Florida, and Ohio. In your application for a permit in a may issue state, you will have to list a reason for wanting to carry a concealed permit, as well as meet the basic requirements set by that state. Some examples of these states include the not so great state of California, as well as New York and New Jersey. Lastly, there are constitutional carry states. These states do not require any permit for individuals to carry a concealed handgun as long as they can legally own that handgun. A mass shooting, as defined by the FBI, is a singular shooting where 4 or more victims are slain, not including the shooter. The FBI further excludes gang violence and violence from a separate crime. The FBI only includes shootings that happen in public places. Public places, as defined by the FBI, are places that are open to the general public. This includes commercial areas such as malls and businesses, schools, open spaces, houses of worship, and healthcare facilities. Now, most of these public places are generally considered gun-free zones. A gun-free zone is a place where it is considered a crime to have possession of a firearm. Federal gun-free zones are places designated by the federal government where no guns are allowed. Now, this includes all governmental entities, such as courthouses, prisons, military bases, as well as schools and airports. States can then add their own gun-free zones to this list. For example, according to Texas law, all hospitals and places that primarily sell alcohol are also gun-free. Lastly, private business owners can also discriminate against firearm owners. In Texas, as long as a business owner has the proper signage to the entrance of that property, they can take permit holders to court. However, if there are no prominent signs or notifications to the entrance of that property, a concealed carry permit holder is allowed to carry on that property. Concealed carry permit holders should be allowed to carry into gun-free zones. My first reason why we should allow concealed carry permit holders to carry into gun-free zones is that concealed carry permit holders reduce crime. My second reason is that there will be less financial burdens on both the victims involved in shootings and on the taxpayer. My third and final reason why we should allow concealed carry permit holders to carry into gun-free zones is that gun-free zones fail to prevent violent crime. Now, those that apply for a concealed carry permit must go through a long and arduous process to ensure they are properly qualified. According to Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H lays out the eligibility criteria that must be met. Applicants must be at least 21 years of age and meet the federal qualifications to purchase a handgun. Now, a number of factors may deem an individual ineligible to obtain a license, such as felony convictions, some misdemeanor convictions, pending criminal charges, chemical or alcohol dependencies, certain types of psychological diagnoses, as well as protective or restraining orders. If you pass all of these, you must then take your 4 to 6 hours of classroom training and take a written exam. If you pass the test, you can then schedule your appointment for fingerprinting, take 1 to 2 hours of range instruction, and demonstrate your handgun proficiency with the Texas Qualified License to Carry instructor. Because these licenses are so difficult to obtain, people with them do everything they can to avoid getting theirs revoked. While these licenses are hard to get, they are very easy to lose. Under Texas law, Class B misdemeanors and above will immediately revoke your permit. This means relatively trivial crimes, such as vandalism, will cost the permit holder. Thus, permit holders are less inclined to cause criminal mischief. In fact, concealed carry permit holders are the most law-abiding demographic in the United States. Between the years 2005 and 2007, there were, on average, 703 crimes committed by police officers per year. Now, as you'd expect, police officers commit much less crime than the average person commits, 31 times less. But how do they compare to concealed carriers? Between 1987, when concealed carry was legalized in Florida, and 2015, 9,366 permits were revoked due to criminal activity. Now, taking into account there are approximately 1.25 million permit holders during this time period, there were on average 12.5 crimes committed for every 100,000 permit holders. In other words, concealed carry permit holders commit crime at approximately 1/10 the rate of police officers, making them the most law-abiding demographic in the United States. Thus, by allowing concealed carriers to carry into gun-free zones, it would not increase violent crime rates. I chose to use Florida stats for this because Florida has the largest concealed carry population in the United States, but we can see similar comparisons in other big concealed carry states, such as Texas, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Now that we have determined that concealed carriers are law-abiding, let's see what effect they have on crime. Between 2000 and 2017, there have been a total of 283 active shooter incidents. Of these, there were only 33 instances where an armed citizen was present at the shooting. But out of these 33 instances, how many of them were stopped by that armed citizen? 94% of them. If concealed carriers are stopping 94% of the shootings that they are present at, why would we want to restrict their access to our schools, to our malls, to our banks? Between the years 2014 and 2017, 16.5% of all active shooter incidents were stopped by concealed carriers. That is 16 unique cases where many lives were being saved thanks to concealed carry. And that number is sure to grow if we give concealed carriers more freedom in where they can carry their firearm. However, when we are discussing mass shootings, it is important to give perspective to the true nature of them. Shootings are tragic. They permanently scar those involved. They hurt the loved ones of those that lost their lives. And the communities where they take place will never be the same. Unfortunately, the effect of shootings goes far beyond the communities where they take place. Dr. Ted Miller is a senior research scientist at the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation. He collaborated with the left-leaning news site Mother Jones to find what the total financial toll of gun violence is in America. The study took place over 3 years. The study went through the combined annual impact of a total of about 11,000 murders, 22,000 suicides, and 75,000 injuries that are a result of gunfire. The findings concluded that the total annual cost of both fatal and non-fatal gun violence to America was $229 billion. This number takes into account the direct costs related to a shooting, such as hospital and ambulance bills, as well as the indirect costs related to a shooting. However, as you can imagine, mass shootings do not only emotionally devastate communities, they leave behind massive monetary debts. According to Miller, the net cost of the Orlando nightclub shooting that killed 49 and wounded 53 others was somewhere between $385 and $390 million. The net cost of the Las Vegas shooting that left 58 people dead and more than 500 injured, approximately $600 million. While these numbers are massive, it is impossible to compute the emotional toll shootings take on both the families and the communities of the victims. One simple way we can reduce these costs is by preventing them from ever happening in the first place. As I made clear in my first point, 16.5% of all active shooters are stopped by concealed carriers. If we could simply allow concealed carriers to carry into gun-free zones where 97.8% of all mass shootings are happening, we can reduce the number of families victimized by these tragedies, while also reducing the government's expenditures. But who exactly is paying for these costs? According to Miller, the taxpayers pay roughly 87% of the direct costs related to a shooting. The direct annual cost for gun violence is $8.6 billion, as Miller concluded in his study. Then the taxpayers pay roughly $7.5 billion every year towards gun violence. Now, that is $7.5 billion that could be spent on infrastructure, education reform, or even Trump's border wall. However, it is the other 13% that isn't covered by taxpayers that will financially devastate individuals' lives. If concealed carry was able to reduce crime in the places where people could carry guns, it would have the same effect in gun-free zones, thus reducing cases where individuals are financially devastated with debt. In 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed the Gun-Free School Zones Act into law in response to the growing amount of violence within the inner-city school districts. This act made it illegal to carry or discharge a firearm within 1,000 feet of a school. Upon first glance, it appears as if this law was doing as it intended to do. Violent victimization rates against students dropped 50%. However, during the same time period, violent victimization rates against students outside of schools dropped 91%, suggesting that these schools are actually becoming safer at a rate slower than the rest of the community. Dr. Christopher Hulse is a lead researcher and executive vice president of the Center for Security Policy. He conducted a study that looked into the real effects of this act. In his study, he concluded that the number of school shootings has more than doubled from 2.7 per year to 6.9 per year. Those wounded in school shootings has nearly doubled from 2.7 per year from 8.8 per year to 13.9 per year. And those killed in school shootings has nearly tripled from 2.7 per year to 7.9 per year. School shootings have dramatically become more deadly and more frequent since the enactment of gun-free zones in our school districts. Rather than drowning out violent crime as these gun-free zones intended, it created an environment for school shootings and violent crime to thrive. Now, let's take a step back and look at gun-free zones through a broader lens. Dr. John Lott is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He's a world-renowned expert on crime and guns and has held teaching positions at both Stanford and Yale University. Over the past few years, Lott has compiled accounts of every single mass shooting from 1950 to May of 2018. In his study, he concluded that 97.8% of all mass shootings have occurred in gun-free zones. If gun-free zones are the places where mass shootings are happening the most, would it not make sense to allow concealed carry permit holders to carry into the places where they may need it most? Especially if they stop almost every active shooter event that they are present at? The simple truth is this, that gun-free zones are premised on a lie, that criminals will obey the gun-free laws by not bringing a gun into a gun-free zone. In reality, the only thing that gun-free zones keep out is law-abiding citizens that protect themselves and those around them from violence. According to the Josephine Exemplary Policing Center, the average response time to shootings was 11 minutes as of 2013, reaching as high as 14 minutes in some cities such as Denver. Gun-free zones rely on the lengthy response time from the boys in blue, while concealed carriers may be able to respond in seconds. Remember, in every active shooter event that a concealed carrier was present at, they stopped 94% of the shootings. If we could simply allow concealed carriers to carry into gun-free zones where 97.8% of all mass shootings are happening, we can exponentially shrink the response time to shootings, thus saving lives. Now, you may be asking yourself, why not just get rid of gun-free zones entirely? The problem with that is the 14 constitutional carry states. As I mentioned in minor audio, these states allow anyone that can legally own a handgun to carry it into a gun-free zone. On the contrary, permit holders go through an extensive vetting process to make sure they know the laws and know how to use a firearm properly. Concealed carriers will not pose a threat in any public place, while it is more plausible for someone without a permit to pose a threat. Lastly, one might argue that a concealed carrier may accidentally shoot and kill a bystander while trying to take down an active shooter. While this is a valid concern, there's never been a single reported case where this has happened. However, in the case that it does happen, it would fall under the doctrine of transferred intent. This means that if a concealed carry permit holder was acting in self-defense against a criminal and a stray bullet hits a bystander, the criminal will be held liable for hurting the bystander because the criminal instigated the conflict. It should be noted that concealed carry permit holders are required to take a shooting test prior to getting their permit. When Dr. Silverman donned a concealed handgun on that Thursday morning, he didn't know that he was going to have to use it. But what he did know is that that 24-inch by 24-inch aluminum gun-free zone sign to the entrance of the hospital would never keep out those who take pleasure in killing the innocent. He knew that he was putting everything on the line so that he may protect the coworkers and patients he cares for. Dr. Silverman and the millions of other Americans that conceal carry shouldn't have to risk it all to protect themselves and those around them from violence. As a student, it genuinely sickens me knowing that there are people outside of these walls that dream of shooting our children. We care about our money, so we protect our banks with guns. We care about our elected officials, so we protect them with guns. We care about our rights, so we protect them with guns. But when it comes to our children, we protect them with a tin sign that keeps out those who wish to protect them and invites those that wish to harm them. I say now is the time we change that. What can we do to make this possible? Well, the answer is simple. Vote. Vote for those that will protect and expand your rights. What happened to Teresa Hunt is disgusting. Let's not let her death be in vain, but a testimony to how ineffective gun-free zones are and how concealed carriers like Dr. Silverman can prevent a murderer from becoming a mass murderer. Thank you. Thank you.
On Caleb's panel, we have Glenn Schuknecht, who's been married for 44 years and has 3 children and 11 grandchildren, all of whom attended Veritas Academy, the grandkids, not the kids. Glenn has been in education for 43 years, including 36 years in public schools and 7 in private schools. His last years before retirement were at Veritas teaching math, coaching, being the director of discipline and discipleship, testing coordinator, and the head of safety. As head of safety, Glenn attended conferences and seminars, as well as watching countless videos, reading many blogs, and laying awake umpteen nights pondering the safety of Veritas students. We also have Matt Thomas. Matt is the CEO of the high-tech data solutions firm JP3 here in Austin. He has been an entrepreneur. I catch no flack for how I pronounce that word. I mean, no end of flack, it's bad. Entrepreneur, I think I nailed it this time. Executive and engineer in the high-tech industry over 2 decades. Matt married his college sweetheart, Andrea, just after completing his mechanical engineering degree at Texas A&M. They have 5 children, including Veritas non-thesis seniors Jacob and Emma, and 5th grader Jane, along with 5-year-old twin girls, Nevi and Charlotte. We also have Alan Walk, who was his advisor, who makes really good coffee drinks that apparently I cannot stop drinking. I need more of the ginger ones, please, Alan. We also have Graham Donaldson, whose own personal version of concealed carry is the muffin he pilfered earlier from the break room and is now concealed lurking in his pocket. So in front of you, you have a paddle. If you show me the white side, it means new question. Red side means follow-up question. The floor is open.
So do you want concealed carriers to be able to carry into all gun-free zones? For example, do you think it is a good idea to allow concealed carriers to carry into bars and other places that sell alcohol primarily?
Well, it's kind of funny because when I was doing my research on concealed carry, there were two places that I had in mind where I wanted to keep strictly gun-free: airports and bars. But as I did more research into airports, TSA kind of sucks at their job. Like, you would think as much time as you spent in the checkpoint lines that they'd be really good at identifying illegal weapons. However, that is just not the case. There was a study that that went to 11 different major airports, and they tested to see how well they could identify fake bombs and guns through their security systems. One of them let 95% of these illegal weapons through, and the other ones were following around at 20% to 50%. That was kind of alarming to me. And then as for bars, there are two states that currently allow concealed carry in their bars: Virginia and Utah. However, I don't have Utah stats. Virginia actually saw a decrease 5% in violent crime in bars after allowing concealed carry in them.
I will never fly again. Donaldson.
Great job, Caleb. I almost call you Caleb. Sorry. All right. So gun-free zones. So you sort of inferred or made reference to the fact that these gun-free zones are designated this way as a disincentive for people to come and commit crimes on them, which you are stating it's not working. Are there other reasons why they're also designated as a gun-free zone? Hospitals, for example. A lot of people on medication and drugs, if a gun gets into their hands. Kids at schools. At churches, perhaps there are religious reasons why they would not want a gun in a place of worship. Have you considered those other factors? So if you let concealed carry into there, are we not opening up problems with these other non-criminal reasons why we designate them as gun-free zones?
Yeah, so concealed carry is exactly that. It is concealed. And only if a concealed carrier is knocked unconscious or severely molested, I don't think there is any chance that a child or someone with a mental disability could get a hold of that gun. As I mentioned in my first point, you have to not have certain type of psychological diagnoses. So I'm not scared that mental patients will get a hold of a gun. And to add to that, we have police officers that open carry, and people can easily identify that they have a gun on them. But we aren't worried that any person would get a hold of that gun. I mean, we allow them to carry around our grammar school students and on all over our campus.
Great job, Caleb. You said that schools are gun-free zones.
Yes, sir.
But Texas is passed and is looking at laws. Do you know anything about those laws? And also, is there a ratio of suggested amount of guns per student at schools?
I don't have a suggested ratio of guns, but you are right. Recently, Governor Greg Abbott allowed concealed carry within our college campuses, of course, as long as you have a concealed carry permit. And this is only applied to the open spaces. However, students are allowed to conceal carry in the classrooms, of course, if they meet all of the qualifications.
So high schools, grammar schools, not allowed still anywhere in Texas?
Well, there are okay, let me kind of take a step back a little bit. Some schools are permitted to allow concealed carry, but that goes through the district school boards. However, most public schools are not do not allow guns on their property.
And one more follow-up to that. How do you feel about schools being a concealed carry zone instead of a gun-free zone?
I think it's a great idea. Well, there's a couple of parts where I mentioned, like in my third confirmatio, I said that the fastest response time to shootings is by having our teachers armed. And as I mentioned previously, there's no way of knowing that a person has a concealed weapon on them unless you ask them personally, which I don't think they would tell you. And if you could physically see it or remove it from them. And it's just not a concern of mine that somebody will be able to get a hold of a concealed carry weapon that isn't the owner of the weapon.
Matt.
Really nice job, Caleb.
Thank you.
Setting the airports and TSA aside, aren't most gun-free zones today patrolled by trained armed guards? At hospitals entrances, you have police there. Here, even at Veritas, we have armed APD officers on site all day long. Would there be an argument that says, well, rather than just enabling your citizenry to be armed, it would be better to have those who are well-trained in the use of those firearms, maybe increase funding to put those guards in place, to put gun prevention, metal detectors, those kinds of things. Would that be a better solution as opposed to allowing for concealed carry?
I do not think so, and here is why. Put yourself in the shoes of a mass shooter. While it is disgusting, they can target the person with a gun. And if they walk through the door with their own weapon concealed and they see that, oh, look, the single armed officer in the entire campus is just sitting there with his gun, that would naturally make them the most primary target, which leaves the rest of whatever property it is on free range. And I believe that this would be the most effective system in eliminating mass shootings.
Caleb, you talked about you said there's a correlation between having gun-free zones, schools marked as gun-free zones, and then you said in that same time span there was an increase in school shooting. Can you speculate or give any sort of reasons why you think that is a causation, that by designating a school, or that it was something else, like just cultural factors at play? Can you give me some more insight into why calling a school a gun-free zone, in your estimation, increased school shootings?
Well, of course, correlation does not necessarily mean causation. It is apparent that concealed carry does play a major role in reducing crime. For example, according to the 2013 National Crime Victimized Survey, I believe that's what it's called, there were reportedly 300,000 crimes that were facilitated with a firearm. Of these, there were only 5,000 crimes that were facilitated by the owner that could legally own that firearm. I don't think having gun laws, or in other words, only 1.6% of all crimes were committed by those that were law-abiding citizens. And I don't think that by having gun-free laws in place, it will have a significant effect on the crime. But more to target what your question was asking, I just don't think that there's a large, I believe that correlation and causation are directly and interconnected in this scenario.
So most schools today are still gun-free zones, and
Right.
and maybe would there proponents of gun-free zones say that what that has prevented are accidental discharge of the firearm and harm to a student, a child. I know you said that concealed gun carriers always have their weapon on them, but by definition, if it's going to be effective, it's always loaded and ready to fire. So would there not be an argument, did you come across it in your research, that gun-free zones have actually served their purpose by preventing those accidental discharges harming a student, not being shot, but just going off when the student finds it, curious second grader comes across it, those kinds of things?
I haven't been able to come across anything that said that, but I do not think that this would be a concern because concealed carriers are required to have their gun on them at all times. And as I mentioned earlier, that concealed carry is concealed, and there's no way of knowing whether a person has that firearm.
So just to follow up on that, to clarify, you would only be in favor of opening up the gun-free zones to concealed carry permit
Yes, sir.
holders, not, for example, to open carry in the states where that's allowed. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Can you give the reason why you would not want it opened up to open carry?
Yeah, open carry comes along with some certain implications. There's a certain air of authority that comes with open carry, and it generally just disturbs people that aren't used to guns. And this would have a negative effect in the environment, whether this is a working environment or just a school zone. And it's just unnecessary fear-mongering that really doesn't help the person carrying the weapon.
Caleb, what percent or how many businesses actually make their own business a gun-free zone? And do you have some that have done that? Do you know some names or?
Well, almost every commercial business, like big name brands, they are gun-free. So Walmart, Target, all of those are gun-free. Usually it's the smaller stores that tend to be lenient on allowing concealed carry into their businesses, but I don't have an exact percentage on how many, because usually it's just a sign posted at the front.
So why are the big businesses so against having concealed carry in their stores?
That's a good question, and in all honesty, I think they just don't have their facts straight, and they have negative implications of concealed carry.
Matt?
I'm wondering, in your research, did you come across some other specific situations where we can point to that very evidently, had it not been a gun-free zone, at least the horrific nature of the mass shooting might have been prevented? And one example that comes to mind just recently is the Sutherland Springs church shooting. I don't know if you looked into that in more detail or if you have others that you could point to that might make the case on the positive side for allowing carry there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cases. We can look at Sandy Hook, Sutherland Springs comes to mind, the Orlando nightclub shooting. As for the Sutherland Springs shooting, it actually wasn't a gun-free zone. The pastor actually usually concealed carries, but he wasn't present during that sermon. He was away on a church mission. If there was concealed carry laws allowed in those places, the amount of people that would have died would be significantly less.
I need to know, has the court case gone against Dr. Silverman yet, and what has happened with it?
I haven't been able to find any follow-up research for that. I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that they didn't press charges because, like I said, Dr. Silverman saved many lives. The shooter had 39 extra rounds in his pockets, and that's 39 lives that could have been saved, thanks to Dr. Silverman.
What do the police and first responder groups or unions have to say about allowing concealed carry in gun-free zones?
I haven't been able to cross any research on the exact opinions of certain labor groups, but there was a survey that went out in 2013. It surveyed 15,000 police officers, both retired and currently working, and 91% of them say that they support concealed carry.
I guess also on that note, not just in regards to mass shootings, but in just general crime, do you know if there's a relationship or any statistics on concealed permit holders with just crime in general?
Yeah, so in 2013, President Barack Obama signed 23 executive orders, and one of them was ordering the CDC to conduct a $10 million study to look into the effects of gun violence in America. They found out that there are somewhere between 500,000 and 3 million crimes that are prevented from concealed carry. This is measured through the defensive uses of firearms. And the reason why there's such a large disparity for this is because a lot of times the firearm is never actually even needed to discharge. For example, Mr. Donaldson, you are in line at HEB with a pint of Cookie Two-Step, your favorite Bluebell ice cream.
That is his favorite. Nice.
It's the original vanilla, sorry, the original.
Oh. Well, the person in front of you pulls out a gun on the cashier and demands them to relinquish all the cash in the register as well as all the buddy bucks. So you, being a good concealed carry, law-abiding citizen, you pull your gun and you stop the shooting from ever happening or the robbery from ever happening. But when you pull it out, he doesn't move. You have a gun on him. He just gets on the ground and the crime is prevented altogether. A lot of the times, crimes aren't even it's not always reported that a crime was stopped because there wasn't even discharge of a firearm. That's why there is such a large disparity.
So an individual can own a firearm without having concealed carry. Did you do any research to see if there are discrepancies between either accidental, events of an accidental nature, and then also the crime rates on the people that are the non-concealed carry owners of firearms? The concealed, sorry.
I haven't been able to find research like that just because it is really hard to know how many people are carrying in constitutional carry states, just because permits aren't required and they're not required to tell anybody that they are carrying.
And what about accidents at home or accidents in places where they're not carrying it in public? I guess my question is, are people who have gone through the steps to be concealed carry shown to be even more responsible with their guns at home than people who have not but still own the firearm?
Okay, I haven't been able to come across that research, but when you're taking your shooting tests with your Texas qualified license to carry instructor to make sure you can get your concealed carry permit, part of it is whether or not you handle your handgun right. So if, say you're lined up for your shooting test and you pick up your handgun and you motion it in a way you're not supposed to, that immediately disqualifies you for getting a concealed carry permit. So that is a factor that plays into whether or not somebody can obtain a concealed carry permit.
I guess this is follow-up with Graham's question. There is a reciprocating among states. I can carry my gun if I have a CHL into some other state. Those constitutional states are a little scary. Are you in favor of a federal concealed carry license that everybody would have to go through the same testing?
Not necessarily that everyone would have to. However, just allow the constitutional carry states to do whatever they're doing, because actually it's working decently well in their states. But I believe that having a federal concealed carry, just flat license that works across all states would be effective. Currently, some states don't recognize other states' concealed carry license, and that can be quite confusing for other people that go into other states with their concealed carry permit because they have to check each state's laws on that. And having a concealed carry permit that is universal throughout the entire United States would be effective.
Matt, you got a quick one?
So your stats are fairly overwhelming, and it would seem to point to this being a natural pathway forward to keep people safe. And yet, every time there's a mass shooting, the first thing we hear most loudly is we need more gun control. So why do you think that is? Why isn't the general public just clamoring to get behind the elimination of gun-free zones? Instead, they're having the opposite.
91% of independent reporters or reporters with a large firm are left-leaning. And there's only, I believe it's 9% of reporters that identify as Republican. And naturally, left-leaning people like to report on what left-leaning people like to do, and that's gun control. And that's the simplest way I can answer that.
All right, thank you.